It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life. Graduation day, the moment when years of hard work, sacrifices, and sleepless nights finally pay off. The excitement was palpable, and the crowd was filled with pride and joy as students walked across the stage, ready to start the next chapter of their lives. But for one young woman, this day would quickly turn into a nightmare. What started as a celebration quickly spiraled into a shocking moment of public humiliation that would change everything. Imagine working tirelessly for years, putting in the effort to earn your degree, only to be publicly shamed in front of hundreds of people, your family, your friends, and the entire school. This is exactly what happened to one black student at a graduation ceremony that should have been a moment of pure achievement. What went wrong? How did this happen, and why was she the target of such cruelty? It all began with a simple decision, one that would ignite a storm of controversy. As she stepped onto that stage, beaming with pride, something unexpected occurred, something that would send shockwaves throughout the entire ceremony. The moment was supposed to be a celebration of her success, but instead, it quickly turned into an unforgettable moment of injustice. The audience sat in stunned silence as the unthinkable unfolded. Eyes darted from one side of the room to the other, confusion hanging in the air. The student's face, once glowing with happiness, now looked like a mixture of shock, disbelief, and deep hurt. What could have caused such a reaction? What led to this humiliating moment that no one saw coming? As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew. People were whispering, exchanging glances, and wondering what could possibly come next. What was the purpose behind this public shaming, and who was responsible? Was this just an isolated incident, or was there something more deeply rooted at play? The crowd had no answers, but the tension was undeniable. What followed was a series of events that no one could have predicted. As the story unraveled, shocking details emerged, revealing that this wasn't just a random act of cruelty, it was part of a much bigger, more disturbing pattern. There were layers to this story, and each new revelation only deepened the mystery. Was this about race? About power? Or was there something more personal going on behind the scenes? The outcome of this tragic event left the entire community stunned. The student, who had worked so hard to get to this point, found herself thrust into a situation where everything she had worked for seemed to crumble before her eyes. But this wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was only the beginning. What happened next? How did this young woman, who had been shamed in front of everyone, rise from the ashes of such an embarrassing moment? And most importantly, what was the final outcome that left everyone speechless? The twists and turns of this story will shock you, and by the end, you'll understand why this was more than just a graduation day gone wrong. The outcome will leave you stunned, and you'll never forget this story. Stay tuned for the full story, as we dive deep into the events that unfolded, the shocking revelations that came to light, and the powerful resolution that no one saw coming. The young woman at the center of this shocking story was named Maya. Maya had always been the type of student who did everything with passion and dedication. She wasn't just smart, she was driven, determined, and relentless in her pursuit of academic success. She grew up in a small neighborhood, where opportunities were limited, but she always believed that education was her way out. It was her ticket to something better. Her journey wasn't easy, she faced obstacles that many could never imagine, but she overcame them with grace, never letting anything hold her back. Maya had always been a role model to her peers. She was involved in numerous extracurricular activities, from tutoring younger students to leading community service projects. Her dedication earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university, a dream that many in her community couldn't even imagine coming true. To her, graduating was more than just a personal achievement, it was a symbol of what was possible when you worked hard enough to defy the odds. When the day of her graduation finally arrived, the excitement was overwhelming. She had envisioned this moment for years, the moment when she would walk across the stage, look out at the audience, and see her family and friends beaming with pride. It wasn't just her success on the line, it was the culmination of her family's sacrifices, her community's belief in her, and her own relentless perseverance. But on that fateful day, something strange was in the air. There was an undercurrent of tension, almost as if something wasn't quite right. Maya couldn't put her finger on it, but she could sense it. Maybe it was just nerves, she thought. Maybe it was the pressure of the day finally catching up with her. She tried to shake it off, focusing on the excitement, the anticipation of walking across that stage, and finally receiving the diploma that would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. What she didn't know, as she prepared to walk across that stage, was that there were forces at play that had been building for months. It wasn't just about her graduation day, it was about a conflict that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface, one that no one had ever told her about. There were whispers in the halls, behind closed doors, and in private meetings that Maya never even knew existed. It all had to do with something she couldn't control, something about who she was. The school, which had long been praised for its diversity and inclusivity, was not as open-minded as it appeared. Behind the polished facade of academic achievement, there was a darker side, one that still struggled with deep-rooted prejudices. Maya was one of the few black students at the university, and while she never let it define her, there were others who saw her race as something that made her different. They saw her as other. And that difference was about to be exploited in a way that would shock everyone. As Maya walked up to the stage, a sense of unease crept over her. She smiled at the crowd, trying to push the nervousness aside. But as soon as her name was called and she took those first steps onto the stage, she could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, too many eyes. Something didn't feel right. And then, in that moment, it happened. She had barely reached the center of the stage when the cheers and applause abruptly stopped. The audience fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the faint sound of whispers. Maya's heart began to race. What was happening? Why was the crowd so still? Had she done something wrong? The tension in the air was palpable. Maya's eyes flickered from side to side, trying to make sense of what was going on. Then, she noticed the faculty members at the podium exchanging looks, strange, almost furtive glances. It was as though something had shifted, and she was the only one who didn't understand why. Her hands trembled as she reached for the diploma she had worked so hard for, but when she grasped it, there was a moment of hesitation. It felt heavier than she expected, and her stomach twisted in knots. Without warning, the dean of the university stepped forward. His face was unreadable, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made Maya's heart drop. Maya Johnson, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, there has been a situation. We will need to speak with you after the ceremony. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had no idea what he was talking about. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mistake? Had there been an issue with her grades? Was she being accused of something she didn't know about? The uncertainty clouded her thoughts, but the dean's gaze told her this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. As the ceremony continued, Maya felt a growing sense of dread. The weight of those words, "we need to speak with you after the ceremony," hung over her like a dark cloud. What could it mean? Why was she the only one being singled out? Her classmates, some of whom she had known for years, glanced at her with confusion and curiosity. But no one spoke a word. The rest of the ceremony proceeded as if everything was normal, yet Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When the ceremony finally ended, Maya was immediately pulled aside by a member of the university administration. She was escorted into a small room behind the stage, and there, in the sterile silence, the truth began to unfold. The university had received an anonymous complaint about her conduct during her time at the school. There was no evidence, no solid proof of any wrongdoing, but the mere existence of the complaint was enough to warrant an investigation. Maya felt the ground beneath her feet shift as the words sank in. An anonymous complaint? About what? Her mind raced as the administrator explained that the university had a policy of addressing any claims, even those without merit, to ensure the safety and integrity of its community. Maya tried to hold back her tears, but the sting of the situation was unbearable. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, only to be dragged into an investigation based on something as vague and unfounded as an anonymous accusation. What was the real reason behind this? Was this about her race? Was this some kind of retaliation? The administrator, a woman in her 50s with a stern but sympathetic face, paused for a moment before continuing. Maya, we don't know the full details yet, but we need you to cooperate with the investigation. If there's any truth to the complaint, we'll have to take action. Cooperate? What was there to cooperate with? Maya was at a loss for words. She had always been proud of how far she had come, how she had proved the doubters wrong, how she had earned her place at this university. But now, it seemed like everything she had worked for was about to be ripped away for reasons that made no sense. She was sent home with the promise that the university would keep her updated on the progress of the investigation, but as she left the campus, her mind was racing. What had just happened? Was this really happening to her? Her family, her friends, and even her professors had celebrated her achievements, but now, it seemed like everything was being called into question. As Maya sat alone in her room that night, the weight of everything pressed down on her. She tried to convince herself that it was just a misunderstanding, that the university would clear things up and everything would go back to normal. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a simple case of miscommunication. Something was wrong, and she needed to find out what. What she didn't know was that the investigation would uncover secrets that would shock everyone involved. And the deeper she dug, the more she realized that this wasn't about one student, it was about a system that had been broken for years. A system that had been protecting its own, at the expense of those who were brave enough to challenge it. Would Maya's fight for justice end in her favor? Or would she be forced to walk away from the institution that had once promised her a future? The answers were just beginning to surface, and the truth, when it finally emerged, would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Stay tuned as Maya's journey unfolds and the truth behind her graduation day is revealed in the next chapter of this shocking story. The suspense is far from over, and you won't believe what happens next. Maya didn't sleep that night. The noise in her head kept her up, turning over everything that had happened, everything that was happening, and everything that could come next. Her mind was a blur of confusion and disbelief. She had never imagined something like this could happen to her. A vague, anonymous complaint based on nothing but suspicion was enough to put her entire future on hold. But even as she sat in her dark room, trying to piece things together, she couldn't shake the growing feeling that this wasn't just about her. There was something bigger going on, something deeper, something darker. The next morning, Maya received an email from the university. It was short and to the point, an official request for an interview with the university's investigation committee. The email seemed so cold, detached. It almost felt like the last few months of hard work and dedication didn't matter. She had always believed that her success at the university would be defined by her accomplishments, her grades, her leadership, her service to others, but now, it seemed like those things didn't matter. What mattered was a shadowy complaint from an anonymous source. She tried to push the growing anxiety from her mind, but it clung to her like a weight. The email didn't say when the investigation would start, but Maya knew that it was only a matter of time before she'd be called in to explain herself. What could she possibly say? The truth was that she had no idea why she was being dragged into this. But there was a part of her that feared it wasn't just an isolated issue, it felt like something more personal. That afternoon, a strange thing happened. Maya was walking through the campus, her mind preoccupied with the mess her life had become, when she bumped into an old friend, Tara. Tara was someone Maya had known since her freshman year, and they'd always been close. They'd spent countless hours studying together, and they'd both helped each other navigate the challenges of university life. Maya was relieved to see her friend. She needed someone to talk to, someone who might understand what she was going through. But when Maya told Tara about the investigation, something strange happened. Tara went silent, her face paling as though she had just seen a ghost. Maya noticed it immediately. "Tara?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What's wrong? Why do you look so?" Tara shifted uneasily, looking around as if someone might overhear. She grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her to the side, away from the bustling crowd. "Maya, I don't know if you should be talking about this," she said in a low voice. "You don't know what you're getting into." Maya's heart raced. What did she mean? Tara had always been a voice of reason. She had been there for Maya through every difficult moment at the university. Why was she so shaken now? "Tara," Maya insisted, "I need to know what's going on. Why is this happening to me? What's the real reason behind this investigation?" Tara hesitated, her gaze darting around nervously before she finally spoke in a hushed tone. "I can't say much, but…" "Maya, you're not the first one this has happened to." Maya's chest tightened. "What do you mean? Are there others?" Tara nodded, her voice trembling. "There have been others. Students, black students, mostly, who have been investigated for no reason. Complaints have been filed against them, and in almost every case, they've been suspended or expelled, their reputations tarnished forever. The administration, they've been covering it up for years." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. This was not just about one complaint. This was something systemic, something bigger than her. It was happening again and again to other students, and now, it was her turn. But why? Why now? "I don't know who's behind it, but I've heard rumors," Tara continued. "There's a group on campus, faculty, administrators, who think the schools should be for a certain kind of student. And if you don't fit that mold..." She trailed off, her voice shaking. Maya's mind spun. What Tara was saying made her stomach turn. Could it really be true? Could the very institution she had worked so hard to be a part of be turning against her simply because of who she was? Before Maya could ask any more questions, Tara quickly glanced over her shoulder and lowered her voice even further. "Maya, you need to be careful. The investigation, they're not going to just let you walk away from this. Whatever this is, it's not just about you. It's about silencing people who speak up, people who don't fit into their narrow vision of what this place should be." With that, Tara walked away, leaving Maya standing there, frozen in place. The words she had just heard echoed in her mind. There was a conspiracy happening right under her nose, and now Maya was caught in the middle of it. She felt a mix of anger and fear, but most of all, she felt a deep, gnawing need to get to the truth. There was something happening on that campus, something that Maya had never even suspected. And now, she was determined to find out exactly what it was. Over the next few days, Maya began to dig deeper into the whispers she had heard from Tara. She started talking to other students, trying to get a sense of what was really going on behind the scenes. What she discovered shocked her to her core. There was a pattern, a disturbing pattern that stretched back years. Black students, especially those who had excelled academically or taken leadership roles on campus, had mysteriously found themselves at the center of investigations. Anonymous complaints, often vague and unsubstantiated, had been filed against them. And in most cases, the students were either suspended, expelled, or left with tarnished reputations that made it nearly impossible for them to pursue careers after graduation. Maya couldn't believe it. How had she been so blind? How had she not seen the signs before? There was an organized effort to target students like her. The administration, the faculty, even the students who were supposed to be her peers. There was something deeply wrong with this institution. Maya had been naive to think it was a place of fairness, a place where anyone, no matter their background, could thrive. The truth was far darker. But Maya wasn't going to be another statistic. She wasn't going to let them tear her down without a fight. She had worked too hard to let this go. She started gathering evidence, documenting everything she could find. She reached out to other students who had been through similar experiences. What she uncovered was even more disturbing than she had imagined. There were hidden meetings, secret emails, and even connections to outside organizations that were pushing a specific agenda on campus. The university, it seemed, was not just a neutral space for learning, it was a battleground. And the stakes were much higher than she had initially thought. Maya was no longer just fighting for her own future. She was fighting for something much larger. She was fighting to expose the truth, to bring light to the dark undercurrents of an institution that had promised so much but delivered so little. The investigation, the anonymous complaint, those were just the tip of the iceberg. The real story was just beginning. But with every step Maya took toward the truth, the more dangerous things became. She was being watched. Her every move was being tracked. And it was becoming clear that the people behind this conspiracy would stop at nothing to silence her. What started as an investigation into her actions had quickly turned into a fight for justice, one that could cost her everything. As Maya delved deeper into the mystery, she began to realize the full scope of the situation. Her investigation was not just about one student, it was about an entire system that needed to be exposed, no matter the cost. But was she ready for what was coming next? Would she be able to uncover the truth before it was too late? The clock was ticking, and Maya knew that if she didn't act fast, the consequences could be far worse than she could ever imagine. The closer Maya got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. She could feel that someone was watching her. Each time she stepped onto campus, there was a strange, unsettling presence that followed her. She wasn't paranoid, she was being surveilled. The once familiar halls of her university now felt foreign, like a trap closing in around her. Maya knew she had to act quickly. The stakes had grown far higher than she had ever imagined, and the people behind the investigation were powerful. But she wasn't going to let them silence her. She couldn't. She spent the next few days gathering evidence. She managed to secretly copy confidential files from the administration server, showing a long history of secret meetings and emails that had been carefully hidden from public view. She reached out to other students, some were too afraid to speak out, but a few came forward with their own stories. Stories that mirrored hers. Students who had been falsely accused, investigated, and pushed out. The pattern was undeniable. And now Maya had the evidence to expose it. She decided to confront the university head-on. Maya arranged a meeting with the university's administration, requesting an official audience with the board of directors. She needed to make her case, to bring the truth to light. It was a dangerous move, but she felt she had no other choice. There was no turning back now. If she didn't do this, if she didn't stand up and speak out, then all of it, the struggle, the years of hard work, would be meaningless. On the day of the meeting, Maya was nervous, but resolute. She walked into the grand boardroom, where the most powerful figures at the university sat, their eyes trained on her. They were expecting a meek student, one who would back down when faced with the weight of their authority. What they didn't expect was Maya's quiet confidence, the fire in her eyes. She stood tall, knowing that this was her moment to fight for everything she believed in. The board members were cold, their faces unreadable. At the head of the table was Dean Carter, the man who had called her to the stage at graduation, the one who had first spoken to her with that chilling, dismissive tone. His eyes narrowed as she walked in, but he didn't say anything. He just gestured for her to sit. Maya took a deep breath and began. I know what's been going on here. I know about the secret meetings, the hidden complaints, the targeting of black students like me. I know you've been using anonymous complaints as a way to push us out. I have the evidence. She laid the files out in front of them, her hands steady as she pulled up the documents she had gathered. The room grew tense as the board members began to look through the files. The truth was there, irrefutable, undeniable. Maya could see their reactions shift from confidence to disbelief, but there was still no sign of remorse, no hint of guilt. It was as though they had expected someone to uncover the truth, but it didn't matter. They were still in control. Dean Carter cleared his throat. Maya, I understand that you're upset. But you have to realize these things happen. We have policies in place to protect the integrity of the university. We can't just let anyone get away with things that undermine our reputation. Maya's blood ran cold. Undermine your reputation? You've been hurting students like me, trying to silence anyone who doesn't fit into your narrow vision of who should succeed. This isn't about integrity. It's about power. It's about keeping people like me in my place. The room fell into an eerie silence. Maya's words hung in the air, heavy and true. She could feel the pressure building. She had said what she needed to say, but she wasn't done. There was more. Much more. Before anyone could respond, Maya stood up. I'm not the only one you've targeted. There are more of us. And we won't be silenced anymore. I'm going public with this. I'm taking this to the press. And I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been doing. Dean Carter looked at her, his eyes narrowing. You think you can bring down this institution? Do you have any idea what you're dealing with? Maya didn't flinch. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. And I'm not afraid of you. There was a moment of tense silence, and then, in a move that no one could have predicted, Dean Carter reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small folder. He slid it across the table toward Maya. You think this is about race? About power? He said with a smirk. You've only scratched the surface, Maya. There's something much bigger going on. And you're not ready for what's coming next. Maya froze as she opened the folder. Inside was a picture of her, taken from behind a tree on campus, a picture of her talking to Tara just days earlier. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just about the university anymore. Someone was watching her every move, and they had been for a long time. Dean Carter's voice was cold as he leaned forward. You've been playing a dangerous game, Maya. You've stepped into something that goes far beyond this university. I suggest you walk away before it's too late. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had never imagined that the stakes were this high. The university was just one part of a much larger web. A web that stretched far beyond the school's walls, with powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. What had she stumbled onto? What was the true nature of the system she had been fighting? Before she could respond, the door to the boardroom suddenly opened. A man stepped inside, someone Maya didn't recognize. He was tall, sharply dressed, and his presence sent a wave of unease through the room. He nodded at Dean Carter and turned to Maya with a chilling smile. Ms. Johnson, I think it's time we had a conversation, he said. His voice was smooth, controlled, but there was something behind his eyes, something predatory. Maya's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about the university. She had been right all along. This was bigger. But who was this man? And what did he want? As the man stepped forward, the room seemed to close in around her. Maya's mind raced. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, who could she trust? Tara had warned her, but now it seemed that the conspiracy was even deeper than she could have imagined. Dean Carter had just revealed that the university was only a small part of a much larger operation. The man who had just walked into the room was a part of it, too. She was in over her head. But Maya wasn't going to back down. She had come too far to turn away now. Who are you? She demanded, her voice trembling but strong. What is this really about? The man smiled again, but this time it wasn't reassuring. Let's just say, I'm the one who makes sure the pieces on the board stay in place. As he spoke, Maya could feel her world unraveling. This wasn't just about race or power or corruption, it was about something far more dangerous. Something that could cost her everything. But just as she was about to ask another question, the door slammed shut behind her. The man, Dean Carter, and the rest of the board members watched her silently as they waited for her next move. Maya knew in that moment that the game had changed. This was no longer just about exposing the truth, it was about survival. And she would have to fight harder than ever to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy, no matter where it led. But what would the cost be? How far would she be pushed before she was forced to make a choice? As the tension in the room grew, Maya realized one thing: the story she thought she was telling was just the beginning of something far darker and more complex than she could ever have imagined. The truth was more dangerous than she had ever realized, and now, it was too late to turn back. Maya stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The door had slammed shut with an unnerving finality, leaving her alone in the room with Dean Carter, the mysterious man, and the members of the university's board. For a long moment, she could only hear the sound of her own breath, shaky and uneven. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the room itself was closing in on her. But despite the fear crawling up her spine, Maya refused to back down. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let them intimidate her into silence now. The man who had entered the room, the one with the cold smile and predatory eyes, stepped forward again. This time, his demeanor was different, more relaxed, almost too calm. He regarded Maya with a sense of detached amusement, as though she were a puzzle he was enjoying solving. You've been quite the troublemaker, Maya, he said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. But you don't understand what you're really up against. You think you're fighting a corrupt university system, but you're not. You're fighting something much bigger than that. Something that spans far beyond this campus, far beyond anything you can even imagine. Maya's heart raced as she tried to make sense of his words. Something bigger? What was he talking about? All of this, the investigation, the hidden conspiracy, had seemed like a localized problem, something contained within the walls of the university. But now, it was clear. There was a larger force at play, one that was pulling the strings in ways Maya couldn't yet understand. Who are you? She demanded again, her voice firmer this time, even as her pulse quickened. What do you want from me? The man smiled again, but this time it felt less like a reassurance and more like a warning. You're a smart girl, Maya. But you're not as clever as you think. You've uncovered just enough to know that something is wrong, but you haven't come close to understanding the full picture. You want to expose the truth, but you have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes. Maya was silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had thought she was close to uncovering everything, to shining a light on the corruption and racism that had been plaguing her university for so long. But now, it seemed like she had only scratched the surface. She had been right all along. This was bigger than she could have imagined. But how much bigger? And who was this man who seemed to know so much about her? Dean Carter spoke up then, his voice icy and controlled. Maya, you've been played. All of this, the investigation, the complaints, everything was never about you. It was about sending a message. A warning to anyone who dares to challenge the system we've built here. You were just a pawn in a much larger game. A cold chill ran through Maya. Pawn? A game? What were they talking about? Was she really just a small part of a much larger plan? And if so, who was behind it all? Before she could ask any more questions, the man spoke again, his voice now carrying a certain level of finality. You've been investigating for weeks, Maya, but there's something you've missed. something right in front of your face. You see, the university, the faculty, even the students, those aren't the only players in this game. There's a much larger network. People in power, people you would never expect, who control the flow of information, who manipulate events behind the scenes. And you, Maya, have just become a part of their strategy. The pieces were starting to come together, but they didn't make any sense. Maya had been working so hard to expose the university's corruption, but now it seemed like the real battle wasn't between her and the school, it was between her and a shadowy, powerful group that operated in the background, pulling strings without anyone knowing. But who were these people? And why had they chosen her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the man's next words, which sent a chill down her spine. You're asking the wrong questions, Maya. You need to be asking yourself why you were chosen. Why you were targeted. What about you specifically makes you such a threat? For the first time, Maya was struck by the unsettling truth. She had been targeted because of who she was, what she represented. She was a black student who had defied the odds. She had fought her way to the top, overcoming challenges that others had failed to even recognize. Her achievements were a threat to the system that sought to keep students like her in their place. But they hadn't just targeted her for that, they had chosen her for a reason. I don't understand, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. What do you want from me? The man's eyes flickered with something almost like pity, though it was quickly masked by the steely determination in his gaze. You're smart, Maya. But you're too emotional, too impulsive. You're playing checkers in a game that's really chess. And the people who are really pulling the strings aren't even in this room. They've been watching you, studying you for months. And now, they're ready to make their move. Maya felt the weight of his words settle on her. She was in over her head, and yet she knew one thing for certain, she couldn't back down now. She had come too far. She had fought too hard. The truth had to come out. The stakes were higher than ever, but she wasn't going to let fear stop her. Then let them come, Maya said, her voice steady despite the panic swirling inside her. Let them do their worst. I'm not backing down. The man didn't respond immediately, but his smile returned. This time, it was different. It was knowing. We'll see about that, Maya. We'll see if you're really ready to play the game. Because once you're in it, there's no getting out. With that, the man turned and walked out of the room, followed by Dean Carter and the rest of the board members. Maya was left alone, her mind a whirlwind of questions and emotions. What had just happened? Who were these people? And what had she just gotten herself into? But there was no time to think about it now. Maya knew that the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. It had only just begun. She had uncovered a fraction of the truth, but the full picture was still out of reach. And as she left the boardroom that day, she knew one thing for certain, this was bigger than she had ever imagined. The conspiracy was real. But so was her determination to see it exposed, no matter the cost. Over the following weeks, Maya's life changed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The more she pushed to uncover the truth, the more resistance she encountered. But she didn't stop. She kept pushing, reaching out to journalists, activists, and other students who had been affected by the same shadowy forces. Slowly, the walls began to crack. The story started to spill out, bit by bit, until the entire world knew what had been happening behind the closed doors of the university. It wasn't easy. There were threats, moments when Maya wasn't sure if she could go on. But with each revelation, with each person who came forward to support her, she grew stronger. And eventually, the full scale of the conspiracy was exposed. The powerful people behind the scenes were revealed, their connections to the university and beyond laid bare for all to see. Maya became a symbol of courage, resilience, and the fight for justice. Her story sparked a movement, one that rippled through the university and beyond, inspiring others to stand up against the systems of power that sought to keep them down. As for the university, the fallout was inevitable. The truth was out, and the damage was done. The administration was forced to confront the deep-rooted issues of racism and corruption that had plagued the institution for so long. The changes that followed were far-reaching, but Maya knew that the fight wasn't over. The battle for justice, for equality, was a long one. But now, she was no longer fighting alone. Maya had uncovered the truth. And in doing so, she had not only changed her own life but had sparked a wave of change that would continue for years to come. The journey had been long, hard, and filled with uncertainty. But in the end, Maya had won. And she had proven to herself and to the world that no matter the obstacles, the truth would always find a way to rise to the surface.